What happens when one of Hollywood's most commanding legends walks into a talk show expecting respect, only to be met with arrogance, insult, and a host who forgets who she's talking to? When that legend is Samuel L. Jackson, the result isn't just an interview gone wrong. It's a collision of pride, power, and truth that left daytime TV forever changed. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a reckoning. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the set with the kind of calm that only comes from decades of being in the spotlight. He'd done this 1,000 times before: talk shows, interviews, press junkets, and he knew how to play the game. But from the moment he sat down across from Tamron Hall, something felt off. Her smile wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that said, "I know your weakness, and I'm about to use it." She shuffled her cue cards with a little too much confidence, and when she looked up, her eyes didn't say, "Welcome." They said, "Target." Samuel leaned back slightly, sensing the tension but brushing it off. After all, he'd faced tougher rooms than this. Tamron didn't waste time on pleasantries. She barely finished introducing him before diving in. "So Samuel," she began, her voice dripping with a kind of fake curiosity, "you've been in Hollywood for what, 40 years now? When do you think it's time for actors your age to stop pretending they're still relevant?" The words hit like a slap. Samuel blinked, almost certain he'd misheard. He gave a short laugh, the kind that wasn't really a laugh at all, and tilted his head. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" His voice was calm, but there was a quiet danger in it. Tamron didn't flinch. "You know, making space for younger talent," she continued, as if she hadn't just insulted one of the most respected men in the business. Samuel's polite smile froze. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. The charm drained from his face, replaced by something colder. The look of a man realizing this wasn't an interview. It was an ambush. Samuel began his answer with the calm tone of a man who'd done situations like this too many times to count. "You know, Tamron, I think relevance isn't about age. It's about—" But he didn't get the chance to finish. Tamron's voice cut through his like a knife. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Samuel," she said, forcing a laugh that wasn't fooling anyone. "You're not exactly breaking box office records anymore." The words hung in the air like a slap. Sensitive. That single word, so small, so casual, carried an insult too sharp to ignore. Samuel's eyes flicked up, and the easy charm he'd entered with vanished. He leaned back in his chair, studying her the way a lion studies a foolish hunter who's wandered too close. Tamron smiled, but it was nervous now, her fingers twitching against her cue cards. Samuel let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable, the kind of silence that made producers in the control room start to panic. Then in a voice that could freeze fire, he said, "Tamron, I'm wondering, did your research team actually prepare for this interview? Or did you just wake up this morning and decide to improvise ignorance on national television?" The audience gasped softly. Tamron's smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered, or at least tried to. "Wow, Samuel," she said, forcing a laugh. "I guess someone's touchy today." Samuel tilted his head slightly, his gaze never breaking. "Touchy?" he repeated. "No, I just know the difference between journalism and provocation. You're supposed to be asking questions, not auditioning for TMZ." Her jaw tightened, but he didn't stop. "You want to talk about records? Let's talk about the one you just broke. The fastest transition from interviewer to headline." The air crackled with tension. You could almost hear the heartbeat of every person in the studio. And for the first time that afternoon, Tamron looked genuinely uneasy, realizing this wasn't going to be another segment she could control. It was a battle she just started, and Samuel L. Jackson wasn't backing down. Tamron shifted in her chair, still trying to keep her composure, but her voice came out sharper than before. "Maybe you're just upset because Hollywood doesn't call you like it used to," she said, tilting her head with that smug talk show host confidence. The words were designed to sting, and she knew it. But Samuel didn't blink. He leaned back slowly, crossed one leg over the other, and gave her a look that could have stopped time. "Tamron," he said, calm as ever, "I turned down more roles than your producers have viewers." The audience made a low sound, that half gasp, half laugh people make when they realized someone just got verbally knocked out. Tamron's lips tightened. She was losing control and she knew it, but she couldn't stop herself. "Oh, come on, Samuel," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You don't have to pretend you're still the Hollywood golden boy." He smiled, that slow, dangerous smile that never reached his eyes. "Pretend? I don't pretend, Tamron. Pretending is what people do when they're afraid of being forgotten." That hit her harder than she expected. She tried to recover with another jab. "Let's be honest, you're past your prime," she said, a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. The words slipped out like poison. Samuel's smile vanished. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a lower register, calm but sharp as a blade. "My prime," he said, "built the road your career's driving on." The tone of his voice made the entire studio go still. It wasn't shouting, it wasn't rage, it was pure, controlled power. The kind that didn't need to be loud to make everyone else in the room hold their breath. Tamron tried to meet his stare, but for the first time she couldn't. Her confidence cracked, and Samuel didn't need to say another word for everyone to know exactly who was in control now. Tamron crossed her arms, her voice tightening like she was trying to regain control she never really had. "Maybe studios just keep you around for nostalgia," she said, almost too casually, like she was testing how far she could go. But her eyes gave her away. They were sharp, searching for a reaction. Samuel didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He sat perfectly still, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice calm but with an edge that sliced through every inch of fake confidence she had left. "Nostalgia," he repeated softly. "That's what people feel for something that mattered." "I still matter, Tamron. That's why you called me. That's why your team reached out, begging for this interview, hoping I'd bring some life to your ratings." The word ratings landed like a body blow. Tamron's smile twitched. For a brief second, the confidence she wore like armor cracked, but she wasn't done. Tamron straightened her back, trying to look composed, though her voice was shaking ever so slightly. "Let's not get dramatic, Samuel. I didn't beg for you. My team just thought people might still remember you." The jab was cheap, but she threw it anyway, hoping to hurt. Samuel chuckled quietly, not out of humor, but disbelief. "People remember me," he said, his tone deepening. "They remember the films, the words, the moments that stuck. You think being on a talk show makes you relevant? Fame built on gossip doesn't last, Tamron. It fades as fast as the next trending headline." His voice was measured, deliberate, the kind of calm that always comes before something breaks. Tamron's hand clenched around her note cards, her knuckles whitening. "You know," she said, leaning forward now, "maybe the problem isn't Hollywood. Maybe the problem is you. Maybe you've just stopped evolving. Maybe that's why you're still talking about the past." Samuel went completely still, and when he spoke, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. "Say that again," he said, his eyes locked on hers. It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. Tamron hesitated. A flash of doubt crossed her face. But pride pushed her forward. "I said maybe the problem is you, Samuel." The second time, the words didn't come out smug. They came out shaky, forced. The room went dead silent. Samuel leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on her like he was dissecting every inch of her arrogance. Then he leaned forward again, his tone slow, deliberate, every word carrying weight. "The problem isn't me, Tamron. The problem is people like you. People who think disrespect is journalism, who mistake shock for substance." He paused, his voice lowering even more. "You came here looking for a headline, but what you're about to get is a lesson." Tamron opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time, she realized she wasn't running this conversation anymore. Samuel was. And from the look in his eyes, she could tell he was just getting started. The silence after Tamron's last jab stretched on so long that even the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in the room did. He straightened slowly, pushing himself up from the chair like a man rising from judgment. Every movement was deliberate, slow, steady, and dangerous. When he finally stood, he towered over her, calm but radiating authority. His voice came out low, clear, and terrifyingly composed. "You invited me here to insult me?" he said, eyes fixed on her. "You don't get to disrespect people who've earned their place, Tamron, while you're still trying to prove you deserve yours." The words landed like punches wrapped in velvet. Tamron blinked, visibly startled, but tried to mask it with a nervous laugh. "Samuel, calm down," she said quickly, hands gesturing in front of her like she could defuse the bomb she'd lit. It was just a question. But Samuel wasn't interested in calming down. His tone hardened, cutting through her excuse like a blade. "No, that wasn't a question. That was an insult. You're not interviewing. You're picking a fight you're not ready for." Tamron's eyes flashed. "Excuse me," she snapped. "This is my show. I ask the questions here." Her voice rose, her posture rigid, the fake professionalism gone now. "You don't get to come on my stage and tell me how to do my job." Samuel took a slow step closer, never raising his voice, but every word carried weight. "Your job," he said, "is to talk with people, not at them. Your job is to make your guests feel respected, not ambushed. You forgot that somewhere between your last commercial break and your last headline." Tamron pushed back her chair, rising to face him, though he still towered over her. "You know what, Samuel?" she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You might intimidate everyone else, but not me. This is my show, and I decide how it goes." She pointed toward the cameras, a last desperate attempt to reclaim her power. Samuel took another step, his presence almost overwhelming. "A show's only as strong as the respect it gives," he said, voice sharp but controlled. "And right now, Tamron, your show is collapsing under your ego." Her face twisted. "My ego? Please. I've worked for everything I have. No one handed me anything." Samuel's eyes narrowed, a flicker of disappointment flashing across his face. "Then why do you act like you're still fighting to prove you belong?" he said quietly. "You made it here, Tamron. But instead of building something worth respect, you turned it into a mirror, one that only reflects you." His voice grew heavier, more personal. "You don't have to tear others down to stay visible. But you just can't help yourself, can you?" Tamron tried to interrupt, but her voice cracked. "You're twisting my words." Samuel shook his head slowly. "No, I'm just repeating them, out loud, so you can finally hear how small they sound." The air in the studio went completely still. For the first time, Tamron's confidence broke entirely. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, then back to him, as if realizing that the audience wasn't on her side anymore. Samuel stood still, calm as stone, his gaze locked on her like he was dissecting the last shred of her defiance. And in that moment, there was no longer a host and a guest, only a woman out of her depth, and a man reminding her what respect really looks like when it stands on his feet. Tamron's face tightened, her voice rising as if she were trying to claw her way back into control. "You know what your problem is, Samuel," she said, her tone dripping with hostility. "You can't handle tough questions. That's your problem." The sentence came out too loud, too fast. It sounded less like confidence and more like desperation. Samuel let out a short, humorless laugh that made the air grow heavier. "A tough question?" he repeated, the corner of his mouth twitching in disbelief. "A tough question comes from intellect, Tamron. Yours came from insecurity." The words sliced clean through the silence. Tamron's eyes flashed with anger. "Oh, so now you're a psychologist?" she snapped. Samuel didn't miss a beat. "No," he said dryly. "I just recognized the sound of someone trying to disguise envy as professionalism." That line hit harder than she expected, and she knew it. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The studio air grew thick again, every second stretching like a wire about to snap. Her pride wouldn't let her back down. Tamron leaned closer, her tone now venomous. "You can act all high and mighty, but this is my stage. You act like a diva here again, and you'll never be invited anywhere." The moment the word diva left her mouth, she knew she'd gone too far, but it was too late. Samuel turned his head slowly toward her, the kind of slow, deliberate movement that carried more danger than shouting ever could. His voice dropped to a quiet, steady rumble. "You just mistook self-respect for arrogance," he said, locking eyes with her. "And that's why you'll never understand greatness." Tamron tried to smirk, but her expression faltered. Greatness, she repeated, forcing a laugh that didn't sound convincing. Is that what you call it? Samuel nodded once. That's exactly what I call it. Because greatness doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't need to. It earns it. He took a half step forward, voice tightening. You're standing in front of someone who built a career from nothing. No shortcuts, no handouts. And yet here you are, trying to make a name for yourself by disrespecting one. Tamron clenched her jaw, trying to keep her composure, but her eyes betrayed her. You think this makes you look strong? She asked, her voice shaking. Samuel's tone turned deadly calm. No, Tamron, he said. It makes you look small. The entire studio seemed to exhale in unison. For a brief moment, even the cameras felt like they were hesitating to move, afraid to break the tension. Tamron crossed her arms, but her silence said more than any comeback could, because for the first time, she wasn't in control. Samuel L. Jackson was. And every person watching knew it. Tamron shifted in her seat, the tension in her shoulders giving her away, even as she forced a smile. You know, Samuel, she said, her voice trying to sound calm but coming out tight. Maybe you just don't like being challenged. Maybe it's hard to face the idea that people aren't afraid to question you anymore. Samuel let out a quiet breath, his jaw flexing. Question me, he said, his tone steady but with that unmistakable edge that made everyone listen. Tamron, there's a difference between asking a question and taking a swing. You talk about relevance, yet your relevance depends on tearing others down. You've confused controversy with courage. The studio air thickened. The way he said it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was surgical. Each word hit exactly where it needed to. Tamron tried to laugh, though her voice cracked just slightly. Oh, come on, she said, waving him off. I'm just being honest. Isn't that what good journalism is? Asking the tough stuff? Samuel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on hers. No, Tamron, he said quietly. You're not being honest. You're being exposed. The way he said that word, exposed, made her flinch. She tried to cover it with a smirk, but her confidence had already begun to unravel. Exposed for what? She snapped. For asking the questions people actually want answered? Samuel tilted his head, studying her the way a veteran actor studies a rookie trying too hard. No, he said, calm as ever. Exposed for mistaking cruelty for courage and arrogance for authenticity. Her face flushed red, but instead of backing down, she stood up halfway from her chair, gripping her cue cards like a shield. You're trying to turn this into a lecture, Samuel, she said, her voice rising. You think because you've been in a few movies, you can talk down to everyone else? Samuel rose too, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the kind of deliberate control that filled the entire space. A few movies? He said, the corner of his mouth curling in disbelief. Let's talk about that, shall we? His tone changed. Not angry, but powerful, the sound of a man who knew exactly what he'd earned. I've worked with Quentin Tarantino, Spike Lee, George Lucas. I've built a career on performance, not pretense. I've been in stories that change the way people see the world, not 15-minute segments designed to trend for clicks. Tamron's eyes widened. You think I do this for clicks? She shot back. I built this platform myself. Every guest, every headline, every insult, Samuel interrupted sharply. You built this on provocation, not principle. You call it honesty, but all it is noise. His words echoed across the studio like a verdict. Tamron clenched her jaw, her voice trembling but defiant. At least I don't hide behind my past. Samuel took one slow step closer, his gaze locked on hers. My past, he said, voice low. My past built your present. Every door you walk through in this industry was opened by people like me. People who fought harder, longer, and cleaner than you ever will. For a moment, Tamron had nothing. The control she prided herself on had vanished, and the silence that followed made her look smaller than ever. Samuel didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He just stood there, composed, steady, untouchable. You wanted to test me, Tamron? He said finally. Congratulations. You just found out what happens when the truth hits back. Tamron's face was pale now, but her pride still wouldn't let her stop. Her voice wavered as she tried to sound composed, though the tremor betrayed her. "You're throwing a tantrum," she said, pointing at him like a teacher scolding a student. The accusation hung in the air for a moment before Samuel even reacted. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, perfectly still, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his tone was low, controlled, and ice cold. "A tantrum?" he said slowly, like he was testing the word. Then he took one quiet step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tamron, a tantrum is what you've been having since the second I walked in. Because for once, your control is gone." The audience could feel it. That shift when confidence dies and fear takes its place. Tamron swallowed hard, but Samuel wasn't done. He could have yelled, but instead, he dismantled her with precision. Quiet, steady, devastating precision. "A tantrum," he continued, "is attacking guests to hide your fear of irrelevance." Tamron opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off before she could breathe. "A tantrum is calling insecurity journalism," he said, his tone sharp enough to draw blood. "A tantrum," he finished, his eyes locked on hers, "is mistaking humiliation for headlines." Each line hit like a hammer wrapped in calm. Tamron's lips trembled, but no words came out. Her usual quick wit, the one that carried her through every interview, every controversy, had vanished. Samuel stepped closer to the edge of her desk, close enough for his voice to drop to a near whisper, the kind that carried more power than a shout. "You wanted to create a moment for television," he said. "Well, congratulations. You just made one, and it's going to follow you a lot longer than you expected." Tamron's hands gripped the edge of her desk, knuckles white. "You're being unfair," she whispered, her voice breaking. Samuel shook his head slowly. "No, I'm being honest. Something you might want to try without a camera next time." The line landed hard, clean, final, impossible to recover from. Tamron's eyes darted to the crew, but no one moved. They weren't just watching a talk show anymore. They were witnessing a dismantling. Samuel didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to insult her. He simply stood there, the embodiment of composure and power, while the host of her own show looked like the guest who'd just been invited out of her depth. The room was frozen in absolute silence, not the kind that follows a dramatic scene, but the kind that follows realization. Tamron stood rigid behind her desk, her cue cards scattered like broken shields, her confidence shattered in front of millions. Samuel didn't gloat. He didn't even look angry. He simply reached up, unhooked his microphone, and set it gently on the desk beside him. The sound of the mic touching the wood was the loudest thing in the room. It was deliberate, respectful, the kind of gesture that said power doesn't need to shout. He looked at Tamron one last time, his gaze calm but heavy with disappointment. "You had a chance to build something worthwhile," he said quietly. "Instead, you chose spectacle." His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried weight, like a teacher correcting a student who never understood the lesson. Tamron didn't respond. She couldn't. Every word she might have said would have only deepened the hole she dug. Her show, her authority, her image, all of it had been stripped bare in front of the world. Samuel took a slow step toward the edge of the stage and turned to face the main camera. When he spoke again, his voice carried not anger but clarity, a calm that commanded respect. "To every host watching," he said, his eyes steady and focused, "respect isn't granted by airtime. It's earned by integrity." His words echoed through the studio, cutting through the silence like truth itself. "This," he added, glancing briefly at Tamron, "is what happens when ego replaces empathy." Then he gave a slight nod, the kind only a man with nothing left to prove could make, and turned to leave. As he walked off the set, his steps were slow but certain, leaving behind the weight of a moment that would live far beyond the broadcast. Tamron stood frozen in place, eyes blank, lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. The cameras were still rolling, catching every second of her silence. A queen dethroned by the very man she tried to humiliate. Samuel L. Jackson didn't slam the door, didn't storm out. He simply left, carrying his dignity with him and leaving behind the wreckage of someone who had mistaken arrogance for power. And as the studio lights dimmed slightly, one truth lingered in the air, like an echo that refused to fade. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. The cameras kept rolling, but no one spoke. The usual cheerful outro music never came, and the teleprompter froze mid-sentence. Tamron stood motionless behind her desk, her microphone still clipped to her blazer, though no one was listening anymore. The studio lights, once warm and flattering, now felt harsh and exposing. She glanced toward the crew, hoping someone would say something. Cut to commercial, cue applause, anything. But no one moved. The silence was suffocating, heavy with the realization that she had just witnessed her own unraveling on live television. Her name was still on the building, printed in bold letters on the wall behind her, but it suddenly meant nothing. The confidence that had carried her through every headline and interview had cracked. What was left wasn't power, it was emptiness. The hum of the cameras became the only sound, an almost mocking reminder that failure doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives in silence. Across the country, viewers sat stunned, rewinding clips and sharing them online before the network could even react. They wouldn't remember the questions Tamron asked, or the smug tone she tried to hide behind professionalism. They'd remember the moment Samuel L. Jackson stood up and refused to be disrespected, calm, composed, and untouchable. It wasn't just another celebrity walkout, it was a public reckoning, a live lesson on what real dignity looks like when it's tested. The next morning, headlines wouldn't talk about Tamron's tough interview. They'd talk about the man who walked away with his integrity intact and left an entire network in shock. That day, Hollywood didn't just remind television what respect looked like. It reminded everyone watching that respect, once lost, is almost impossible to earn back. It wasn't just a meltdown. It was a masterclass. The moment Hollywood reminded television what dignity, restraint, and real power look like when tested in front of millions. If you believe respect is earned, not demanded, hit subscribe, share this story, and join us for more moments that shook the screen and changed everything.